how The Lord of the Rings ends. The ring destroyed. Sauron defeated. The hobbits return home to peace and safety. But that's not how Tolkien's story ends. In Tolkien's actual finale, the hobbits return to find the Shire burning, Saruman exacting his final revenge, and home no longer safe. This is the ending millions never saw, and the chapter Peter Jackson cut from his films. Here's the fascinating thing that most people don't realize. Tolkien didn't consider the Scouring an epilogue. He saw it as the actual climax of The Lord of the Rings. According to Tolkien scholar David M. Waito, there are actually two quests in Tolkien's masterwork. There's the Ring Quest, the journey to Mount Doom that everyone knows. But overarching that entire story is what Waito calls the Shire Quest. The quest to save the homeland. Think about it. The story begins in the Shire. The hobbits leave specifically to protect the Shire from Sauron's reach. Gandalf repeatedly emphasizes the Shire's importance, and Tolkien himself stated that the formal structure, a journey outward for the quest and a journey home, was foreseen from the outset. From the very conception of the story, Tolkien planned for the hobbits to return and face a final test. The Ring Quest was preparation. The Shire Quest was always the real mission. This changes everything about how we understand the story's structure. What Jackson cut wasn't a postscript tacked onto a finished tale. It was the finale Tolkien had architected from the beginning. The moment when everything the hobbits learned in the wide world would be tested in the place that mattered most. So what actually happens in the Scouring? Let me paint you the picture that never made it to film. It's November of the year 3019 in the Third Age. While the Fellowship was fighting at the Black Gate and destroying the ring, Saruman, already defeated at Isengard, was enacting his revenge on the Shire. Not with armies, with something far more insidious. The four hobbits, Frodo, Sam, Merry, and Pippin, return to find the Shire occupied by what the locals call ruffians. These are men from outside the Shire, brought in by Saruman, who's now calling himself Sharky. The name comes from the Orcish word for old man, a fitting degradation for a fallen Istari. But it's not just the occupation, it's the transformation. The old mill, that picturesque water wheel that Sam saw in Galadriel's mirror, has been replaced with a brick factory belching black smoke. Trees have been cut down, not for lumber, but for no reason at all. Old hobbit holes dug out and destroyed, gardens defiled. And then there's the question of what happened to Lotho Sackville Baggins. Lotho, called Pimple by the locals, had started this. He'd been selling pipeweed to Saruman, profiting handsomely, using the money for a land grab. He'd established what amounted to a totalitarian regime in the Shire. But when Saruman himself arrived, Lotho became inconvenient. The hobbits eventually learn that Wormtongue murdered Lotho in his sleep on Saruman's orders. There are dark hints that Wormtongue may have done even worse, that in those desperate months at Bag End, cannibalism might have occurred. Tolkien leaves it ambiguous, but the implication hangs in the air like smoke. The hobbits rally the Shire folk. On November 3rd, 1319, they fight the Battle of Bywater, the last military engagement of the War of the Ring. Merry, who'd learned tactics from the riders of Rohan, commands the hobbit forces brilliantly. He uses wagons to block a high-hedged lane, trapping the ruffians in a tactical ambush. Between 19 and 70 hobbits die in the fighting, sources vary, along with roughly 70 to 100 ruffians. The bodies are buried in an old sand quarry that becomes known as the Battle Pit. a permanent memorial that even the Shire had its war dead. And then comes the confrontation with Saruman at Bag End. Frodo shows mercy, refusing to kill the fallen wizard. But Wormtongue, broken by years of abuse, finally snaps. He cuts Saruman's throat. Hobbit archers immediately shoot Wormtongue down. Saruman's spirit rises as a mist and is blown away by a wind from the west, rejected even in death. This entire chapter, this battle, this occupation, this final confrontation never appears in Peter Jackson's films. Here's what makes the Scouring thematically devastating. It destroys the illusion of the safe homeland. Throughout the main quest, the Shire exists in the Hobbits' minds and in ours as the safe place. The green refuge untouched by war, the reason for fighting, the place where everything will be okay again once the ring is destroyed. But Tolkien, who'd returned from the trenches of World War I to find his childhood landscape industrialized and most of his close friends dead, knew better. As Sam says when he sees the destruction, it comes home to you because it is home. Without the Scouring, the war story remains over there. It's abstract, distant, happening in exotic locations with unpronounceable names. But by bringing the evil to the Shire, by making Bag End itself the site of Saruman's final stand, Tolkien makes the cost of war intimate and personal. The familiar is just as vulnerable as the exotic. The homeland is just as open to degradation as Mordor. There is no safe space that evil cannot reach. This mirrors the actual experience of World War I veterans who returned to find there were no jobs, no housing. They'd fought for their homes, but when they got back, those homes had fundamentally changed. The England of 1914 was gone, replaced by something harsher and more industrial. Tolkien wrote in his 1966 foreword, "The country in which I lived in childhood was being shabbily destroyed before I was 10. He was referring to the Birmingham sprawl consuming the Warwickshire countryside, the industrialization that transformed Sarehole Mill from an idyllic corn mill to just another piece of industrial machinery. The Scouring isn't allegory. Tolkien hated allegory, but it has what he called applicability. And for anyone who's ever left home and returned to find it changed, the chapter resonates with devastating clarity. But the Scouring isn't just about war's reach into the homeland. It's about a specific kind of evil, environmental desecration as vindictive nihilism. Saruman, in Tolkien's letter 131, represents a particular corruption. As Tolkien wrote, "The chief form this would take with them would be impatience, leading to the desire to force others to their own good ends, and so inevitably, at last, to mere desire to make their own wills effective by any means." Saruman started with good intentions, using his knowledge to improve Middle-earth, but impatience led to the desire to force his vision on others, and eventually to pure domination through any means necessary. But by the time Saruman reaches the Shire, he's past even that. He's lost, stripped of power, driven purely by spite. His orders to his followers after arriving: hack, burn, and ruin. Trees aren't cut for lumber, they're cut for no reason. The old mill isn't replaced with a factory for economic benefit, it's replaced to pollute and despoil. This is destruction as revenge against existence itself. Treebeard had described Saruman as having a mind of metal and wheels, a mechanistic worldview that sees nature as raw material rather than sacred. In the Shire, we see the full fruition of that philosophy, not industrialization for progress, but industrialization as blasphemy. Tolkien himself had watched this happen to his childhood. When he visited Sarehole in September 1933, he found the area exposed to such violent and peculiarly hideous change that it broke his heart. The mill of his youth had fallen into decrepitude. The Scouring is Tolkien's meditation on what happens when the mind of metal and wheels is turned loose on paradise. when efficiency and control are valued over beauty and growth, when the earth itself becomes an enemy to be conquered rather than a garden to be tended. But here's the crucial narrative point. The hobbits face this threat entirely alone. No Gandalf appears to counsel them. No Aragorn arrives with an army. No elves ride to the rescue. The Scouring of the Shire is, as one scholar put it, the true test of the hobbit heroes. No king or wizard will help them here. They must do the job themselves. And they rise to the challenge magnificently. Merry, who'd served the riders of Rohan and helped slay the Witch King at Pelennor Fields, commands the hobbit forces at Bywater with genuine tactical brilliance. He uses the terrain, the banked road, the high-hedged lane, to create a perfect ambush. Pippin, who'd served in the guard of Gondor and killed a troll at the Black Gate, fights alongside him as a seasoned warrior. Both of them are now the tallest hobbits in history at 4.5 feet, having been changed by the Ent draught they drank with Treebeard. Their physical transformation mirrors their psychological one. They've literally grown from the journey. This is the completion of their character arcs. The Battle of Bywater proves they're not heroes because Gandalf made them heroes or because they were in the right place at the right time. They're heroes because they genuinely transformed. They learned, they grew, and now they can save the Shire through their own skill and courage. Without this test, we can't be certain the growth was real. With it, we know. But the Scouring also reveals a tragic truth about war. Not everyone can return. Consider two hobbits and their very different fates. Sam uses Galadriel's gift, earth from Lothlorien and a silver nut, to restore the Shire. He plants trees throughout the land. The silver nut becomes a malorn tree, the only one in the Shire, growing in the party field where the original party tree was cut down. Redemption in the exact site of loss. The year after the Scouring, 1420 in Shire reckoning, becomes known as a marvelous year. The best harvests, the warmest weather, the most children born. This goes beyond natural recovery. It's eucatastrophe, Tolkien's concept of grace working through faithful human action. Sam marries Rosie Cotton, has a family. His descendants take the surname Gardner in honor of his restoration work. He finds healing through labor and love. But Frodo can find no peace. His wounds, the Nazgul blade at Weathertop, Shelob's sting, the burden of the ring, return painfully on their anniversaries. He says to Sam, "I tried to save the Shire and it has been saved, but not for me." Before returning to the Shire, Frodo had asked a question with no answer. Where shall I find rest? Some wounds cannot be healed in Middle-earth. Some veterans carry trauma so deep that ordinary life becomes impossible. Frodo has been transformed into something between mortal and immortal, between hobbit and something else. He's elven-touched, marked by burdens that remove him from normal existence. Only by sailing to the undying lands can Frodo hope for healing, and even that isn't guaranteed. Just the possibility of rest for wounds that cannot be wholly cured. The Scouring gives us both possibilities, Sam's hopeful restoration and Frodo's tragic exile. Both are true, both happen simultaneously. That's the complexity Tolkien offers. War doesn't have one outcome, one neat resolution. Some heal, some don't. Some plant gardens, some sail away into the west, seeking rest they may never find. So why did Peter Jackson cut this chapter that Tolkien planned from the beginning? Let's start with what Jackson and his co-writer Philippa Boyens actually said. Boyens explained, "You can't have a huge climax that your main characters have been striving for 3 films, and then start the story up again and play out an episodic conclusion. An audience sitting in the cinema just wouldn't go for it." Practically, including the scouring would add another half-hour or more to a film that was already over 3 hours long. It would create yet another battle sequence in a movie full of them, and it would require the story to restart after what felt like its natural resolution, the ring's destruction at Mount Doom. Here's the cruel irony. The Return of the King was already criticized for having too many endings. Billy Crystal joked at the 2004 Oscars, 11 nominations, one for each ending. Viewers felt the 27-minute denouement took its sweet time coming to an end. So Jackson faced a paradox. Including the scouring would be anticlimactic after the ring's destruction. But the film already had too many endings without it. Adding another major conflict after the supposed finale would push audience patience past the breaking point. But there's a deeper theoretical point here about adaptation and medium. Modern adaptation theory, scholars like Linda Hutcheon and Robert Stamm, argues that adaptations should be judged on artistic merit, not fidelity to source material. Hutcheon calls adaptation repetition without replication. You're not photocopying the book, you're translating it into a completely different artistic language. Cinema operates on different structural principles than novels. Novels can sustain multiple climaxes and extended denouements. Readers can pause, set the book down, return to it. The pacing is self-directed. Film is different. You sit in a theater for a fixed duration. The pacing is imposed. And cinematic structure typically builds to a single climax, followed by swift resolution. Episodic conclusions, where you resolve one conflict and then start another, work in books. On screen, they feel anticlimactic. And there's a precedent for successful omission: Tom Bombadil. Jackson cut Tom Bombadil from Fellowship of the Ring, and it's widely considered one of his best decisions. As Jackson explained, what does Old Man Willow contribute to the story of Frodo carrying the ring? What does Tom Bombadil ultimately really have to do with the ring? Interestingly, Tolkien himself said, Tom Bombadil is not an important person to the narrative. He's thematically important, representing something Tolkien felt mattered, but narratively tangential. The Scouring is different. Tolkien planned it as structurally essential, not just thematically resonant. But from a cinematic perspective, it faces the same problem. It doesn't advance the ring quest, and Jackson made the judgment that film audiences needed singular focus on that core journey. So what was lost? We lost the theme of war reaching the homeland, the violation of the safe refuge. We lost the environmental destruction critique, Tolkien's meditation on industrialization destroying paradise. We lost the Hobbit's final test of independent agency. We lost Saruman's complete character arc. We lost the context for why Frodo must leave. His wounds only make full sense against the backdrop of the Scouring. But we gained narrative momentum. We gained a clear, heroic climax focused on the ring quest. We gained a film trilogy that was, by any measure, spectacularly successful. 17 Academy Awards, nearly $3 billion in box office, considered one of the greatest literary adaptations ever made. And perhaps that's the real answer to why Jackson cut what Tolkien planned. Not because he misunderstood Tolkien's moral universe, as some critics claimed, but because he understood film. Jackson himself said, "You shouldn't think of these movies as being the Lord of the Rings. Any films will only ever be an interpretation of the book." He was right. The films are an interpretation, not a transcription. They're repetition without replication, the same story told in a different artistic language with different structural requirements. Is what was gained worth what was lost? That depends on what you value. Tolkien's complete thematic vision or cinematic accessibility for millions who might never read the books. There's no objectively correct answer, just a genuine dilemma between two valid artistic priorities: literary depth versus medium-specific storytelling. The scouring of the Shire remains in the book, waiting for readers who want Tolkien's full vision. And Jackson's films exist as their own artistic achievement, bringing Middle-earth to life for a generation who might otherwise never have experienced it. Both have value. Both tell truth about Middle-earth, just in different ways. And maybe that's as close to eucatastrophe as adaptation can get. And so, we're left with a beautiful tension. Tolkien gave us a finale that brought the war home, that tested his heroes without mentors, that showed both tragedy and grace in the aftermath. Jackson gave us a trilogy that brought Middle-earth to life for millions who might never have read the books. Both are valuable. Both tell truth about Middle-earth, just in different languages. If this exploration resonated with you, please like the video and subscribe to Ranger of the Realms for more deep dives into Tolkien's legendarium. And let me know in the comments, do you wish Jackson had included the scouring, or was he right to cut it? Until next time, may you find eucatastrophe in unexpected places.